Linda, and this is Coffee and Crime. This podcast explores real cases involving violence, loss, and the darker side of human nature. Some details may be confronting. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Today we're looking at a case that began as a routine police warrant in a quiet alpine town, and it ended in one of the most serious armed confrontations Victoria has seen in recent years. No speculations, no assumptions, just the timeline, the facts, and what unfolded moment by moment. Let's get into it. August 26th, 2025. Porepunkah is not a place that demands attention. It sits in Victoria's northeast, tucked against Mount Buffalo, surrounded by terrain that naturally isolates it from anything beyond its own boundaries. Mornings there don't arrive sharply, they seep in. Mist moves through valleys like it has nowhere else to be, and the town exists in that rhythm, slow, predictable, contained. Until that rhythm breaks. Police arrive at a rural property on the outskirts of town. The operation is straightforward in definition, but not always in execution. A search warrant, a known subject, a structured entry plan. Dezi Freeman is the occupant of the property. His wife and child are also present during the execution of the warrant. They are not targets of the operation, but they are inside its physical perimeter, which is something that always matters operationally, even if it doesn't define the outcome. They would later be detained and released without charge. The property itself is isolated, not just geographically, but functionally. Rural land, bushland edges, uneven ground that affects movement and sight lines more than it appears to from a distance. Structures are scattered across the site, not centralised, not predictable in layout. Among them is an old bus, positioned and used as part of the living environment. Not hidden, but not open either. Just part of the landscape in a way that doesn't immediately stand out until you are close to it. Freeman is located inside the bus. At this stage, the operation is still procedural. Warrant execution protocols are in place, communication is initiated, and commands are issued. Time begins to stretch slightly, not because anything is happening, but because nothing is resolving. That period of waiting is important in policing operations because delay is never neutral. It is always interpreted. And here, interpretation becomes uncertainty. At some point, the decision is made to enter the structure. This is not sudden. It is the result of accumulated lack of resolution, a threshold decision. Once entry begins, the environment changes immediately. Distance disappears. Options narrow. Everything becomes close range. Gunfire is discharged from inside the bus. There is no warning phase, no gradual escalation, no negotiation extension. The shift is immediate. 2 officers are fatally shot. Detective leading Senior Constable Neil Thompson, Senior Constable Vadim Dewart-Hotard. A 3rd officer is shot and injured. He survives by taking cover beneath the bus structure itself, remaining there until extraction becomes possible. At this moment, the operation stops being a warrant execution. It becomes a critical incident, not in classification alone, but in function. Everything that defined the original plan no longer applies. Freeman exits the bus after the shooting. The property immediately transitions into multiple operational categories at once: crime scene, threat environment, search zone. These are not separate spaces. They overlap. And that overlap is what creates operational complexity. Freeman's wife and child are detained during the incident. They are later released without charge. Their involvement ends at presence within the environment of the warrant, not participation in the violence itself. Quick pause here. If you're enjoying these deeper case breakdowns, there's a full extended membership version available through the website. That's where I go beyond the main narrative into structure, timelines, decision points, and the investigative layers that don't always make it into the public cut. It's all linked in the description if you want to go deeper. Alright, let's get back into it. The terrain around Punkah becomes part of the operation immediately, not as background, but as structure. Because this region does not behave like open land in a simple sense. It folds. It breaks line of sight. It creates concealment without intention. And it allows movement without easy confirmation. That matters more than most people realise, because once Freeman leaves the bus, he is no longer a fixed point. He becomes a variable within geography that does not give up information easily. The search begins quickly. Air support is deployed. Ground movements move through accessible corridors. Search grids are established and adjusted, but nothing resolves into confirmation. No verified sightings, no stable tracking information, only absence of certainty. And in operational terms, that absence becomes active. It has to be treated as movement without evidence. Hours pass, then days. The search does not collapse. It expands and contracts at the same time. Reports are processed, areas are ruled out, and leads are tested and discarded. At this stage, silence becomes a form of data. Not because it means nothing is happening, but because it means nothing has been proven yet. Porepunkah does not remain outside the operation. It becomes part of it through proximity. Roads are controlled, access is adjusted, and restrictions shift depending on operational requirements. For residents, normal life does not fully reset during uncertainty. It pauses in fragments, because nothing feels fully stable while the situation is unresolved. As time continues, attention shifts publicly. The focus remains anchored on the two officers killed, Neil Thomas, Vadim DeWart Hotard. Their names become central to every update, every briefing, every public acknowledgement. The search exists alongside that grief, not separate from it, but structurally linked in public perception. When the reward is announced, $1 million for information leading to Freeman's capture, the operation changes phase. Not because it's failing, but because it's no longer contained internally. Information is now externalised, invited, expanded beyond policing channels. This is where investigations change psychologically. People begin reassessing memory. They reevaluate what they think they saw, reframing past uncertainties as possible relevance. This is not unique to this case. It happens in every extended manhunt, but it changes the information landscape significantly. Over time, the search becomes less about expansion and more about elimination. Reports are filtered, leads are verified before action. Regions are ruled out methodically. At a certain point, a manhunt stops feeling open. Not because the target is closer, but because everything else has already been removed as a possibility. Focus narrows towards the Victorian-New South Wales border, not abruptly, but through layered exclusion of other regions. Each cycle reduces the map further, until what remains is not broad search territory, but a corridor of operational possibility. The terrain here is different again. Less visibility, more separation between structures, more space between reference points, and more opportunity for concealment that is not immediately obvious. Police do not act on instinct at this stage. They act on assessment. Containment planning begins before contact occurs. Specialist units are deployed into position, not in response, but in preparation. Freeman is still considered armed, unaccounted for, high-risk subject of active operation. Nothing about that status has changed. A shipping container is identified on rural land within the operational area. Isolated, not visually prominent, but structurally significant in terms of concealment potential. Police establish containment. Communication begins. Instructions for surrender are issued. Inside the container, Freeman is confirmed to be present. He is armed, and he does not comply. At this point, the operation transitions from search to contact resolution readiness. Once compliance fails in a contained armed offender scenario, operational options narrow significantly. There is no extended negotiation phase, only risk-based decision-making under immediate conditions. Police discharge firearms. Freeman is shot and killed at the scene. The operation ends there. The immediate threat is removed, the site is secured, forensic teams move in, and evidence is collected. The sequence is reconstructed through operational accounts, physical evidence, and procedural documentation. This is where the operation ends and the investigation begins. 2 officers killed, 1 officer injured. 1 offender escapes initial scene. Months-long search operation follows. Reward issued. Intelligence narrows location. Final contact occurs at the remote site. Freeman is killed following refusal to surrender. Porepunkah does not return to what it was before that morning, because events like this do not sit inside a town. They sit inside a memory. And memory does not reset when operations conclude. It only settles differently.